that people need to focus on is the relevance of data. I think there's a real danger that people collect data for the sake of collecting data. And what happens then is you get into this procrastination, analysis, paralysis type thing. I went to a conference 4 years ago where one of the big major IT companies, probably even bigger than, well, definitely much bigger than Ericsson, had been collecting data on a lake and they for about 3 or 4 years. And they pointed out that historically people had done a single sample, I think it was every month or every fortnight or something like that. What they were doing was taking data samples and measurements every 2 seconds, I think it was. So they had a massive amount of data. And the guy was presenting all this data, and he basically said at the end of it, we can't make any sense of it. It's not really telling us everything. And one of the main reasons for that is that they fall into the trap of treating it like a chemistry experiment and just monitoring the chemistry. In reality, what you're dealing with is biology, and that is why this sort of monitoring is so relevant. And I've had various instances, I've just been making notes whilst I've been thinking. One, where we were doing a presentation in a pavilion to the committee, and the pavilion had a sort of lawn and then the lake. The lake was greener than the lawn. And people on the committee were saying to us, why aren't you going to test for phosphorus? And I said, why waste your money testing for phosphorus? Your lake is greener than your lawn. It's obvious to anybody that your lake is, huge amounts of phosphorus. You don't need to test that to combine it, to confirm it. What you need to understand is what type of algae are in that lake. Is it cyanobacteria? And what do you need to do to reverse that? And we have another one that 3 years ago when we first met with them, their concern was the sludge and sediment. And I said, we have the biodredging way to deal with that, but what you should be concerned about just looking at your lake is you're very close to having a cyanobacteria crisis. They hadn't even thought of that. Their consultants were measuring phosphorus and total organic carbon and things like that. The following year, 2020, when I was there, it was obvious they had a massive microcystis bloom. Last year, because we were going to be installing and implementing a remediation program at the end of the year, we began taking algae samples every fortnight. And what we saw throughout the year were two things. One, between 60 and 70% of the algae present were HABs, cyanobacteria. And secondly, we were able to, because we were getting the taxonomic analysis, which FlowCam would give you, we were able to see how you had a successive reign of cyanobacteria. So as the season progressed, one form would come and dominate. As that died off or sort of went down, another cyanobacteria would take its place. So you have a succession of cyanobacteria. This year, we were delayed in starting the program because they got a consultant in to come and, I guess, police it and have an independent measure of what we were doing. By the time we started treating at the end of April, it was 99%, 98%, 100% cyanobacteria. So it was obvious the thing had progressed. Measuring phosphorus, which is what the consultant did. The consultant is monitoring phosphorus and nitrogen and conductivity and pH. It tells you nothing about what's going on in your lake. And they have now got to the point where they're saying to us, should we stop the consultant? Because the consultant's not telling us anything, because we, at our own expense, are taking samples, sending them to the laboratory, we're understanding the cyanobacteria levels, and we are adjusting our remediation program according to that. We've got it down to, cyanobacteria are down to 45, 50%, but the cell counts are down at about 10% of what they were this time last year. That is what you need to know, and that is what you need to understand. Phosphorus and things like that are not really that relevant. And the other thing, just yesterday, I was sent some reports on the lake. They do an annual report. And again, they're measuring all the water chemistry. There's virtually nothing that tells us, what's going on with the phycology, what's going on with the cyanobacteria, other than they've had so many events and the lake is shut down. Interestingly enough, and it's something I've spoken about before here, is this whole idea of a leapfrog technology. There's no need for countries, markets, whatever, that are just getting into this technology to make the same mistakes that have been made in, the more advanced, in inverted commas, countries in the past. In the last month, the Government Accountability Office in the US, which basically they were asked to go and do an audit, not a financial audit, but check the performance of the federal agencies in terms of managing the HAB situation in the US over the last 20 years. And they basically have said, in a very polite way, all you're doing is monitoring HAB events as they take place and then reacting to them. And the way you're reacting is mitigation, which they define as putting up notices, issuing warnings, and basically running around with your hair on fire, and control, which they say is applying chemical treatments to kill the HAB cells. And they make the point that those chemical treatments make the situation worse. Because biologically, when you kill off that biomass, one, you're likely to release toxins, and two, that biomass sinks to the bottom, decomposes, and make the situation worse. So the monitoring and detecting that they're doing at the moment is triggering actions that make it worse. And they're saying that is why over the last 20 years, the situation is getting worse and worse and worse in the US. And what they're saying they need is monitoring of parameters that allow an assessment of the situation, allow prediction of what the likely future progress is going to be, prioritization of which are the most critical lakes in action, and then preventative. They need preventive remediation. And contrary to what Dr. Ravi said, he obviously hasn't seen some of our presentations in the past. But we have an extensive track record over many years and many water bodies of reversing eutrophication, reversing HABs, preventing HABs, and getting the things under control. And our take on the GAO report was exactly stop measuring parameters that are irrelevant and trigger reactive responses. What you need is things like algae tracker. Because when you put that in, you can track, do we have green algae? Are we drifting towards cyanobacteria? If we are, that gives you a priority. That gives you the ability to predict that this lake is going to deteriorate further. And in particular, once you see that HABs are there, then you need to start using something like FlowCam, so you can identify which genus, which species, are they, in what sort of numbers and so on. So if this technology is only going to be used to identify HABs and then go and apply chemicals, you're just using it to let you know when to go and make the situation worse. And, I think what's critical for people like Carlo, and if India are starting with a new program, is that they don't make those same mistakes of the past, that they adopt this sort of technology. So they're monitoring relevant parameters and factors that allow solution design and intervention rather than chemical interventions, because this is biology, it's not chemistry. If I can just do a quick comment on the desalination, there's been academic research that has shown the discharges from desalination plants promote offshore cyanobacteria and red algae blooms, toxic blooms. And again, that's another trap that people who are building new desalination plants should not fall into. And you're having, massive blooms off the west coast of the US, where you've got lots and lots of desalination going on. They have they've got massive fish kills going on at the moment. It's the same on the west coast of Australia, it's the same in Cape Town, it's the same in Florida, it's the same in the Arabian Gulf, where you have the desalination plants. And like I say, the causative link has been shown. They cause offshore blooms, and exactly what you say, then you can't draw the water in because the water is contaminated, so you have to shut the plant down. Don't make the same mistakes.